Easter isn't just a Sunday. It's not over when the lilies fade or the alleluias grow quiet. For the church, Easter is a season where we gather again and again to tell the story of a love that would not stay buried, of a life that refused to end, of a God who keeps showing up in ways we don't expect. In the days after the resurrection, Jesus kept appearing at tables, on roads, behind locked doors, meeting people in their fear, their doubt, their ordinary lives. And nothing was the same. Because resurrection doesn't just happen once. It keeps happening in small moments, in quiet courage, in justice rising, in hope breaking through. This is a season to open our eyes, to look for signs of new life in places we thought were finished. A season to be changed in how we see the world and how we live in it. Because Easter isn't just a Sunday. It isn't even just a season. We are Easter people living on this side of resurrection, trusting that love has already won, that death does not have the final word, and that God is still making all things new. So take a breath and get ready as we turn to the Easter stories of Jesus so that we might keep watching, keep noticing, keep becoming. Because Christ is risen and resurrection is still unfolding now.
The Gospel of the Day is from John chapter 20. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors were locked, for fear of the Judean authorities, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord, and Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them, and if you retain the sins of any, they are retained." But Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the marks of the nails and my hands in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." He said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put them in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. Here ends the reading. So the question is, what does Jesus' resurrection mean, and what does it mean for us? Like, what are we supposed to do about that? It's even a question slightly more difficult than what's your favorite Easter candy on an island. I personally said Peeps because then I could avoid sugar because I don't like Peeps. That's what I said. But that also shows that I'm 61 years old, so I got to deal with sugar all the time. So Jesus comes to the disciples who were locked for fear of the Jewish authorities. And I always want to say it that way because the word Judean did not refer to all Jewish people in the first century. It has since come to mean that. What we're really talking about is the Judean authorities who were under the thumb of the Romans. Because as I've said before, remember that the chief priest had to go to Pilate's headquarters to get his robes. And so if the chief priests and that whole class didn't keep everybody quiet and compliant with the Roman Empire, they would not remain in leadership for long. And so it really should, so in the first century, anybody who heard this would have that little phrase in their head. They would know that the Judean leadership was under the control of the Romans. And sadly, so often the word Jews in the Christian scripture taps into and supports a kind of anti-Semitism that is just not great for us or for anyone, and especially for our Jewish neighbors. So they are locked in this room, kind of hiding for fear of the Judean authorities, because it made sense that if Jesus was just crucified and kind of wrapped up, and they would want to come out and do a mop-up operation with all of his followers, right? And so Jesus shows up among them. The doors were locked. Jesus shows up among them and he says, "Peace be with you," which is something that we say most of the time in our churches. So understand that when we say the terms "peace be with you" to each other, we are speaking not just like, "Hey, it's nice to see you, I wish you well." We're actually stating the resurrection in that moment. And we're actually breathing out of our mouths the same kind of peace that Jesus is speaking to his disciples in that locked room, in that moment of intense fear and pain and anxiety and despair. So understand that when you say "peace be with you" to someone, that's not hi and hello. That's a remembrance for this exact moment. And that's why we do that nearly every Sunday, right, in some way or another. So Jesus comes in and he says, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." And that's super powerful, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. And he says, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." What does that mean? Does that mean that being Christian is all about judging and forgiving some people and not forgiving others? No. It has to do with the fact that because of the Roman Empire's existence and oppression of people, because they set up a pecking order of human beings, some were important, some were not. Some were very few were wealthy, most were very, very poor. That people began to live inside of that competitive system, inside that kind of pecking order system, and they were fighting with each other for status. And if we turned this church into a big community fighting for status all the time, what would happen? We would start being mean to each other. That would be the opposite of "peace be with each other." It'd be, "I want to put you down because I can only stand on your shoulders." So there's a tremendous amount of pain that they've caused each other. And so what Jesus is inviting them to do is to continue this work of forgiveness, to help the community forgive each other for the ways that they've bought in to this status-keeping competitive system where they haven't had peace with each other, where they've only had competition. So Jesus says, "As the Father has sent me, so I send you." You're here to bring reconciliation and peace amongst all these folk that have hurt each other, and to even recognize when we've hurt someone. So then Thomas comes, and Thomas was not with them. And Thomas says, "Yeah, you guys say you've seen the Lord, but unless I see the marks of the nails and the spear, I am not going to believe." And in this moment, our brains take us to a certain kind of question. Because we are all coming about 300 or 400 years after a thing called the Enlightenment. You've heard Rene Descartes, who said, "I think, therefore I am." What he was basically saying is our capacity for logic as human beings is what makes us uniquely human. And because we have some capacity for logic, therefore we're smart and therefore we exist. I mean, he said more than that, but that's kind of the basic. And we impose that question of the Enlightenment on this text. We also do it with another text as well. Over the Holy Week, we usually read Pontius Pilate saying, "What is truth?" And we think that Pontius Pilate's being some kind of 17th century philosopher. No, he's not. Pontius Pilate is basically saying the only truth that matters is power. And I could care less about your philosophical truth, right? That's all he's saying. Well, we do the same thing here, and we think that Thomas is doubting that Jesus can be resurrected. We think Jesus, most of us, consciously, we come to this question, well, what's he doubting? Well, he must be doubting that this dead guy could be raised from the dead and become alive. Well, that's a question that most ancient people would not have bothered to ask, because they didn't live in a world where we've reduced all truth to some kind of scientific sort of formula and statistics, where we've decided because of science that some things can happen and some things simply can't. They didn't live in that world. That's not the question that they're asking. Because like when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, was there anybody saying, well, we don't think that this is scientifically possible, and there's no possible way that, unless you have a resuscitation machine, and, they weren't thinking that way. They thought they had a whole different sort of view of the world. And many of us, of course, today are recognizing the limits of that kind of attempt to reduce everything to some kind of scientific formula, which in fact most scientists don't do. But it's kind of a bad habit that we have sometimes, to reduce everything to that. So what is it that he's doubting? What is Thomas having a problem with here if he doesn't have a problem with the idea that someone could be resurrected? It's because Thomas has a very clear idea, like many of his Jewish partners at the time, for what a Messiah was supposed to do. And over the last 2,000 years, we all, Christians, have gotten pretty fuzzy about that. But fortunately, over the last 40, 50 years, there's been a lot of good biblical scholarship that's helped us understand. So let me take you on a quick tour of what a Messiah is supposed to do, okay? So remember the whole Maccabee revolt, the 8 days, the Hanukkah thing, they were hiding in this cave, and the oil lasted for 8 days, and they were able to overcome. Well, who they were able to overcome is a guy named Antiochus Epiphanes, who was a Greek king and who came and captured Israel. And he came and he killed a lot of priests. He did a lot of horrible things. He took over the temple. He forbade people to practice Judaism, or their own tradition, that they should become Greeks. They should become Hellenists, so they were called. And so what Antiochus Epiphanes did, he sacrificed pigs in the temple. He did a lot of horrible things, and he really tried to erase their culture. But eventually they kicked him out. And everyone came into Jerusalem in a big procession holding palms. Does that sound familiar? So they came into Jerusalem. Jesus likes a parade, but he especially likes a parade that reminds people of significant parts of Jewish history. And so Jesus leads this parade, just like the Maccabees led this parade to come in and cleanse the temple and to restore the people of Israel to their own freedom and to their own traditions. So in that time, when Antiochus Epiphanes was still killing lots of people and is trying to erase Judaism from the planet, there was a prophet named Daniel. And Daniel saw into the future that there would be a day when the Son of Man would come. The Son of Man would cleanse the people of Israel from future empires that would come and try to steal their cheese. And then what would happen is that after the Messiah came, the Messiah would bring resurrection to all those who had died under occupation. Because think about it. If people are living under intense occupation, they never know anything but fear and terror. Their minds, their bodies are impacted by all this terrible violence, by people trying to dominate them and to take their food and to take their kids, and a world of just dog eat dog, kind of power. What about the people who lived during that time? And so as they thought about the Son of Man coming, which they would later call the Messiah, that the Messiah would bring resurrection to the folk that never got to experience life on earth as it should be. It was a matter of justice. And so the Messiah was supposed to do a lot of things. Was supposed to, and we know these words, right? To cleanse the lepers, to make the lame walk, to make the blind see, to make the deaf hear, to release people from prison who were put there for no good reason except that they were fighting against an empire. And the Messiah was going to make this beautiful feast where all the nations, in fact, could come and eat of this beautiful feast. And then at that point, the Messiah would raise the people from the dead who never got to experience life on earth as God intends. And so the Messiah was supposed to accomplish all of this. The Messiah was supposed to transform and get rid of the Romans, the Roman Empire, and transform the Romans into beautiful, peaceful people and bring peace to the earth. That's what the Messiah was supposed to do. And so when Thomas is sitting here and he's hearing that Jesus was resurrected, he has no frame of reference for this, because he believed that the Messiah was going to come and set things right. The Messiah was going to get the job done. I mean, it's like asking someone to come and clean your house. And in the middle of their cleaning your house, they say, will you please come help me clean the house? And by the way, I'm going to leave in 5 minutes, so I want you to finish cleaning the house. Are you going to be very happy with that house cleaning service? If they come and get only part of the job done, but they say, I've shown you now how to clean your house, so now I'm going to go because my job is done. Would you be happy with them? Would you hire them back? So here is a Messiah that Thomas believed in. He trusted that Jesus was the Messiah, and he trusted that Jesus was going to finish cleaning the house. The Messiah was going to get the job done, but Jesus was killed. Nowhere in that expectation was the Messiah supposed to be killed and raised from the dead. Nowhere. Nowhere. The Messiah was supposed to get the job done. And so when Jesus shows up in the room that was locked for fear of the Judean authorities who were under the thumb of the Roman Empire, and Jesus says these words, as the Father has sent me, so I send you. And Thomas is saying that wasn't part of the deal. You were supposed to get the house clean. You were supposed to finish the entire yard. You were supposed to mow all the grass. You were supposed to create all the peace. And now you're asking me to take up your messianic leadership among others and continue that work in the world. That, I think, is what Thomas was doubting. He wasn't imposing scientific rationalism on a resurrection. His understanding of what the Messiah was supposed to do to complete the job of peace did not include him having to continue that work. And so when Jesus says this, peace be with you, he says, as the Father has sent me, so I send you. Jesus is changing their entire notion of what messiahship is all about. And now he is saying that instead of him finishing the job, he has now acted in such a way that the disciple community can now take up the messianic job description and continue to do it in a world that has unfinished business, in a house that is uncleaned, in a yard that's only quarter mowed. It is now your job, Jesus says. Now, how many of you would rather, and I want you to be honest with yourself, you don't have to nod or shake your head or anything, but just be honest, how many of you would rather that Jesus had just finished the job? Oh man, you guys have kind of let the cat out of the bag here. I mean, I would too. But now we have to go back to something deeper. So when the man and the woman are in the garden and they see the fruit of the tree, and they decided that they wanted to be like God instead of being human. That they didn't want to get focused on caring for the garden and caring for each other. They just would rather be like God and not have to mess with all this stuff. That story is all about human beings rejecting what it means to be human. And that story is saying that all of us have a tendency to do this. But then what does God do? Well, after a while, God calls Abraham and Sarah, and says, now I want you to go out and be a blessing. What is happening with that is an attempt to ask Abraham and Sarah to do what they were created to do, to tend the earth, to be a blessing to other people, to care about each other, to care about themselves, and to build a world of equity and justice and beauty and peace, and a thriving natural ecosystem, and a society where everybody has enough, and everybody has a job, and everybody has what they need to survive, right? Everybody has a sense of meaning. And so what's happening here is part of a deep biblical theme where God just doesn't come in and fix everything, but God calls human beings to take part in that recreation. That is not adding an extra job description to you and I. That's not adding an extra job description to the disciples, which, by the way, included women in this room. That is calling us to recognize that the reason that we're here as human beings isn't to have somebody else come and fix everything for us but that part of our own healing is to take part in the healing of the world. Now again, as we face a lot of chaos in our world, as a lot of things are happening that we might wish were not happening, a lot of things that we may not feel we have any power about, is God asking you to take more responsibility than you have power? And the answer is no. The Messiah is not saying, as the Father has sent me, so I send you. And so now I want you to go out and finish everything. Now I want you to go out and fix everything. Now I want you to go out and bring healing to everyone. I want you to be a totally healed person, as if that's ever such a thing. Jesus doesn't ask us to do more than we have responsibility, capacity, and community to do. He is simply asking us to do what we can. Because isn't that what Jesus did? In his day, he might not have alone have been able to kick out the Romans and to bring peace to the entire Middle East, and to unite all of his people, and to bring healing to all the trauma they'd caused each other. What he did was begin it. What he did was to show that if you spend your life bringing healing to the world, if you spend your life loving your neighbor and the environment, if you spend your life becoming reconnected again to the job that God gave all human beings to till the earth and keep it, and to love our neighbor as we love ourselves, that if an empire kills you on a cross, that's not the last word. If you do not get the job completely done, that does not mean that you have failed. Jesus' resurrection, as the disciples are trying to understand, was the first fruit of a Messianic community that is now going to continue the work of Jesus in the world. And so in this text, as Jesus says, as the Father has sent me, so I send you, Jesus is inviting not only those disciples, men and women, in that room locked for fear of the Judean authorities and the Romans that were behind them, but God is calling you and I to do what we are capable of doing. God is calling you and I to do what we can for the healing and creation of the world. And to trust that even when we fail, there will be resurrection not only for us, there'll be resurrection for the people around us and the people opposed to us. That there will be resurrection in the world where one day there will be a time when the healing work is done. Jesus invites the church into a time between his resurrection and the ultimate healing of the universe, and to see everything we do, everything members of our church do, everything we see people in other faith communities do, everything we see people in government try to do when they're acting in the interests of everyone, which isn't all the time, as threads that Jesus is weaving together into a tapestry of healing until we do come to the day when we will all sit at that great feast. So Thomas's mind is officially blown because he thought Jesus was supposed to get it done. He wasn't expecting that Jesus was going to say to him, now it's up to you to do your part. But in the power of the resurrection, we can trust that even if we don't get it all done, what's going to happen? New life is going to come through our little small efforts, whatever our capacity happens to be, whatever our responsibility is. And that God will weave that into the ultimate healing of the world that Jesus' Messianic movement is a part of. So, I have to say, if I were to have written the gospel, I would have wanted it to be different. I would have wanted Jesus to finish the job. I feel that way too. But then, the Messiah's job isn't to fix everything, it's to help us realize that we've all been called to take part in God's great healing of the world. And to remember, even when it's hard, that work is a part of God's healing for us. Amen.